All right, folks, been a while, but we've managed to round up the crazy guys here for a big album ranking series here. This is our, believe it or not, the 53rd album ranking that we've done on the site here. And as you can see, we've got Mr. David Hens up there, Davey Cretin on the bottom there, and Thom Jennings on the other end there. Welcome, gentlemen.
And of course, we are being hosted by the award-winning Joseph Suto, right?
Forgot about that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
you're welcome. Why don't you tell, but before you start, why don't you tell people about your award?
well, it's just an award that was given to me by Cowboy Mockball. Every year he does a award ceremony right at the same night as the Grammys with people who've helped him, throughout his, because he's been writing a lot of books over the last few years, and he does a lot of interviews and a lot of things. And I actually won Interviewer of the Year, surprisingly.
Nice. Well,
So it
well
was a
deserved.
surprise. I didn't expect it because I was nominated a couple times and I never won. So it's like, oh, I actually won. That was pretty cool. Pretty
It was
nice.
a good interview you did with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Went through a lot over this past year and been a tough road, but here he is still out there and living the rock and roll dream, which is good. Nice to see. All right, so today we are in Dire Straits, as Davey Cretin would give a look there. So we're gonna rank the small but steady catalog of the Dire Straits, 6 albums in all, and we're gonna go right into it. No need to hesitate here. We're gonna start off with what Mr. David Hens feels is the least popular or his least favorite album of his of this catalog.
All right, yeah, number 6, I went with the last one, On Every Street from '91. I mean, this album really wasn't on my radar at the time at all in the '90s. I wasn't listening to Dire Straits too much back then. But I looked it up and I was honestly shocked that it sold 1 million records in the U.S. It went platinum because it feels like it snuck in just in time, because I feel like it had to come out a couple years later. It probably wouldn't have sold that much because obviously the landscape changed by like 92, 93. But yeah, I went back and listened to this album quite a bit recently. I mean, it's good. There's a lot, like, none of these albums are bad. I think like Mark's playing is always great. Like his soloing is always tasteful. He has a lot of good licks on here. And like I don't know, there's just a lot of slow arrangements on here that it's not a very exciting album to listen to. But I think like Ticket to Heaven was the one song that really stuck out to me as my favorite. So yeah, it's I like it, but yeah, it's got to be number 6. So
Okay. What do you got there, Thom?
I got the same thing. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add other than what Mr. Hens said. It's just, to me, I mean, the history of the album too, if you look at it, I think it was a little bit too late to consider it a follow-up per se. I mean, a true follow-up. It's not a true follow-up to Brother in Arms, which was their most commercially successful record. But it just, I don't know. I think by this point, Mark Knopfler, because we have a couple of Knopflers involved in Dire Straits through their history, had just kind of, he was kind of over it and just sort of past the whole Dire Straits thing. And even by the time this thing comes out, what was the year again, Hens? It was
91.
91. I guess we're not quite into grunge yet, but it definitely, the music scene was changing in terms of how people were purchasing. I mean, Brother in Arms, which we'll talk about at some point, it was the first like million selling CD in that format. So I think to some degree Dire Straits' music lends itself to kind of audiophiles and people that were record collectors and things like that, even though obviously they sold that really popular selling CD. But I don't know, it just seemed to be, anticlimactic, I think, is the best way to put it. Almost like, what was Supertramp's last album we did there? There's 2.
Famous Last Words with Roger Hodgson.
Yeah, last one with Roger Hodgson. I mean, in some ways that felt a bit anticlimactic as well. So it's sort of in the same
3 years later. It came out 3 years after the big one.
Yeah. It's weird, man. I don't, it's, as you said, how many 50 some odd reviews, Joey, it's
Mhm.
like, it's so weird. Like I just feel like bands could really catch some momentum when they were putting out a record a year and a half. I mean, they would
Mhm.
have that creative peak, but once the industry standard became 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years between records, you really just didn't start to see that the quality kind of to stay up. And I think that that's a little bit of the case with this one. I mean, there was definitely a prolific period, although these guys didn't put out a lot of records quickly in their time together. So that's what I got.
All right, Davey.
We're going to differ this time, Tom, because I was working at the record store, as I always say, unfortunately, at the time of that release. And we played that CD all the time in the shop, especially my boss played it a lot. So I have a different take on that album. Coming in at number 6 for me from June 1979, the second album, Communique. And it's not a bad record. I agree with what David said. They don't have any bad records in that catalog. This record just hit me the least out of everything in their big 6 album catalog. It reached number 5 in the UK, number 11 here in the States. So it was a drop off from the first album. And it went platinum in the UK, but only gold here. It's produced by Barry Beckett and Jerry Wexler, 2 old timers, although Barry Beckett was the keyboard player with Muscle Shoals. It's the last album with the original foursome, the original lineup, because after this album, Mark's brother David left the band. And my favorite songs on this album are Lady Rider, Portobello Bell, and Once Upon a Time in the West. I think it's sort of a carbon copy, almost a little bit, follows the same format of the first album. I just don't think the songs are as good, and maybe the record company rushed them to release it. So coming in at number 6, Communique from 79.
All right. Well, mine is going actually back to On Every Street, my number 6. Obviously it's 6 years between this one and the big one, Brothers in Arms. It's like, and that's where they lost a lot of it. It's amazing they were even able to sell 1 million with this On Every Street. Not that it's a bad album. It's not. The hits on there were decent. They got a lot of airplay, Calling Elvis, Heavy Fuel, Fade to Black. There's another couple good songs on here. How Long. But it just compared to the rest of the albums, it's the longest one. They put the most number of songs on this album as opposed to any other albums. Their other albums can range anywhere from 5 to 9 tracks, and this one, they put 12 on. So they went into the old CD age and just added on more filler, really, which really kind of, to
100%.
me, brought the album down, you know. So On Every Street, number 6. So 3 out of the 4 were on the money with this one. And now we're going to go down to number 5.
Money for nothing. We're on the money for nothing. Checks for free.
All right, 5, I'm going to go with Communique. Pretty much what Davey said. It's essentially a carbon copy of the first album. I mean, the formula is pretty much the same. I mean, I like Once Upon a Time in the West a lot. Lady Rider was a single that's pretty good. Where Do You Think You're Going? It's pretty good. But yeah, I mean, it's sonically, it sounds very much like the debut. It just doesn't have a song like Sultans of Swing to kind of put it over the top for me. So that's why it's a number 5.
All right.
You're quick on that one. Well, Davey said so much already. And just to kind of piggyback on what Davey said too, we've discussed this a lot of times on this particular, when we've done review shows, is that I think a lot of times an album, in terms of the way you feel about it, is when it finds you. You know what I mean? So you're talking about how you were in a record store. You had more familiarity with this record than I assume any of the other 3 of us, because when it came out, again, you were meeting customers who were buying it, you were listening to it a lot, so you have a different relationship with that record, which is cool. So like I think there's been records when I was like a line cook that we just used to listen to while we were cooking meals that I still am very fond of to this day, that bring me back to another time. But yeah, I have the same Communique, and I agree 100% on it. Just does feel like it is a little bit sort of like with Boston, Boston and Don't Look Back, very similar records, but Boston was a stronger record in terms of just the songwriting. Formula wise, very similar. Quality wise, very similar. If I remember correctly, when I was poking around at some of the credits, is it the first one or maybe this one that Steve Winwood's brother had something to do with?
The first one.
It's the first one. Okay.
He
Yeah.
produced
Guy's
it,
name,
Muff Winwood.
Muff. Who names their
Shredded,
kid Muff?
shredded, and unleaded Muff
Yeah.
Winwood.
he should do an album with Mutt Lang. We get a Mutton Muff. But anyhow, that's what I got.
All right, and that's gonna go to Davey now.
Okay, number 5 for me is the debut album from 1978, produced by the infamous Muff Winwood, Steve's brother. Both the first 2 albums clock in at about 41, 42 minutes, which is perfect time. And like Joey said, the problem with On Every Street is that it's the CD age, so it's an hour long. It's 60 minutes, a hair over. So I agree with you there. Just too much filler, unfortunately. But going back to the debut album, it went to number 5 in the UK and number 2, or is that number 12? I can't even read my notes here. It went double platinum in the UK and in America. And when this came out in 78 and when it really hit in early 79, at least here in the States, it was totally different sounding from everything else out there. There was disco, there was hard rock, there was AOR, what's now called classic rock, pop music. And this just came out of nowhere, and just this guitar sound that it captivated everyone with Mark Knopfler's great guitar sound. And I want to give some credit to the rhythm section. John Ilsley on bass and backing vocals, who stayed with Mark Knopfler through the entire career of Dire Straits, and the great drummer, very underrated, Pick Withers, from the first 4 albums. Pick Withers is a great drummer. And of course, Mark's brother David on rhythm guitar. I think they came out fully formed, didn't sound like anyone else. And also, it was Mark Knopfler's storytelling. He was very Dylan-esque in his storytelling and with his vocals too. He was sort of singing, speaking like Lou Reed and Bob Dylan, very different sounding voice. And it came out of nowhere. And a lot of people love this record. And my favorite songs from it, Down to the Waterline, Water of Love, and of course, Sultans of Swing. And it just takes you right back to 1977 when it came out. So that's my number 5, the debut, and it's not a bad record. Just because it's number 5, it could be someone's number 1, and that's fine, because it hit them when they were in junior high, high school, college, whatever. It's a really good record. The debut at number 5. Sorry to ramble on.
Yeah, you meant 78 was when it came out.
Right, it came out in 78, but it hit here sort of in 79. It was
Right,
bigger
right.
overseas first.
Okay, you said 1977, so that's what really got my attention there.
I'm
So,
sorry.
but I know what you meant. It happens every time in myself too. But but number 5 for me, I'm agreeing with Davey. It's the debut album, number 5. Probably didn't expect me to say that. I was kind of surprised myself. But I don't know. I just make it I find it amazing how a guy that grew up over there where he did in London and everything could write about the West. This album has a lot of like a Western kind of like almost Texas feel to it in parts. And that's what really kind of, I don't know, I just couldn't really get into it that much. It's amazing how you get Sultans of Swing. Everybody knows that song. They played the heck of it on the radio. Great song, and that's really what put them on the map. And then you go to listen to a lot of the album, Southbound Again, Wild West End. And a lot of these songs sound like they got a little bit of country western feel to them too, if you really get a listen to the guitar playing and everything. So I was really surprised by that, especially after hearing Sultans of Swing. You just didn't see it coming. But to me, it was a turnoff. I didn't really, none of the songs really reached out and grabbed me after Sultans of Swing, really. Down to the Waterline, yeah, that's an okay song. But other than that, nothing really just grabbed me. So that's why I got it where I got it at number 5. So let's go on to number 4.
All right. Yeah, number 4. I'm gonna go with Brothers in Arms from '85. It's their 9 times platinum in the United States, which is a massive number when you think about it. But I don't know. I mean, I like Money for Nothing, but I feel like that's not really. I don't know. It never really struck me as a true representation of what Mark Knopfler wanted to be. Like he wasn't like the flashy mainstream guitar player like that. But I mean, it's a good song. I think my favorite songs off the album are like Ride Across the River and The Man's Too Strong. It's like the second half of the album. I mean, it's a good record, but I feel like it's a little dated in spots, and I feel like they're the it's not really in the sweet spot of what his playing was for me. Like it's the albums which I'll talk about later are just a little better for me. But yeah, I mean, I respect the legacy of the album, and obviously the video for Money for Nothing was huge on MTV. So, and you got to shout out the Weird Al Yankovic parody, Beverly Hillbillies, which is another great thing. So, it was well, the story of that song was that Mark Knopfler would only let Weird Al cover the song and do the parody if he let Mark play the lead guitar on it. So that's so when you the album you hear the version you hear on Weird Al's album is Mark Knopfler playing that song. So
All right. What do you got for us, Mr. Jennings? You going to
Is it
throw us a
me?
curveball here?
For 4, man,
Yeah.
you know what? I'll tell you, I'm throwing you a curveball. I've been trying to change out my microphone because I was getting this weird buzz. So if you have one of those videos where you're showing everything going on at the time, everyone, in case anybody's wondering, that's what I'm trying to do. I got 2. This one's a little too far over. My numero 4 or quattro, as they say, is Love Over Gold, with of course the famous opening track Telegraph Road. Which, by the way, fun fact, I mean, I don't know how fun it is, it's a fact. There is I live out in a place called Oakfield, New York, which is, I mean, Dave, you're downstate and everybody else, but for those of you looking or watching this that aren't from the area, it's just this really small town near, I guess, Niagara Falls, about an hour from Niagara Falls, but well, not Oakfield, but this town, Medina, they actually have a road called Telegraph Road in Medina. And every year they have a running event where people listen to the song Telegraph Road and just run on Telegraph Road for as long as the song is playing, which I think is kind of a cool little thing. But yeah, and I think it's a great song. This album, I don't know, it's kind of mellow. I enjoyed it. It's just not in my top 3. How's that? It's the first time we've mentioned it as well, right?
Yep. So far, yep.
Yeah.
You're the first.
I haven't gotten any looks of disgust yet. This is the new microphone I should be talking in a minute, though.
Well, I think before we get into Davey real quick here, since you just brought that up, I think just like you guys are saying, they haven't really made a bad album. I think a lot of their albums are all kind of there. So, I mean, in essence, anything could have been number 6, could have been number 3, 4, 5. I mean, I have a feeling we're all going to have a different number 1 too. So I think this was a very cool episode. So let's hear what Mr. Davey Cretin has to say about his number 4.
Number 4 from 1991, 6 years, more than 6 years after Brothers in Arms, On Every Street comes in at number 4. And I think I like this more than most casual Dire Straits fans or even hardcore Dire Straits fans, just because I have that relationship with it where I heard it so much in 1991 and 1992 at the infamous Titus Oaks in Hicksville, New York, where I was working at the time. And the problem with this album is it has too many songs, 12 songs, like you said, Joey, 60 minutes, and it's just a lot of mellow songs. There are some really good mellow songs, but my favorites from this album, Calling Elvis, On Every Street, the title track, Heavy Fuel, which is sort of a rewrite of Money for Nothing, and The Bug, I really like a lot. Sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug, something I've been saying for decades now. So that is my number 4, On Every Street from 1991. By the way, number 1 in the UK, number 12 in America, double platinum in England, and it went platinum here, as you guys said.
All right, very good, very good. And that concludes our talk on that album because you're the last one to mention it now. So that's like I said, that's why we do these rankings. Everybody has their own take on them, and This one is definitely this catalog's really you know, we're not all agreeing on every single track, every single album, so that's a good thing though. So my number four to close out our number fours is going to be none other than Communique, and yeah, I mean, Lady Writer is the gem of the album in my estimation. You know, there's no doubt about it in my mind. I actually think that's probably my favorite Dire Straits song, period. Um, that's how much I like it. Um, Follow Me Home was a song that I definitely liked. The rest of the album, though, pretty much like Davey had said, and it seemed like it's a carbon copy of the first album in a way. And he, Once Upon a Time in the West, there's that Western feel, Western theme again. He brings up. Um, for some reason, he must have liked cowboys and stuff. That's probably why he got a lot of inspiration from all this stuff. Angel of Mercy. Where Do You Think You're Going? Those are a couple other ones that stand out on the album as opposed to some of the other ones. Kept it 9 songs, same as the first album. He did 9 songs on the first album as well. So yeah, I mean, not much more to really add on that one, other than the fact that it did reach number 11 in the U.S., number 5 in the U.K., and it did make only gold. So out of all their albums, that's the only one that's gold, right?
No, Love Over Gold is gold in America too.
Okay. I wonder which one actually sold the most. Interesting. All right. So that concludes that one.
Could
Let's
I
go
just
on.
add?
Yeah.
Could I
Oh
just
yeah.
add something before you go, David? I think like the way we're fascinated with a lot of British music, like the Beatles, Yes, the Stones, etc. All those bands that I love are from England, and we're Anglophiles the way we like Monty Python, some of their comedies, the Avengers TV show from back in the day. I think that British people are fascinated with certain parts of American culture, whether it's the West or the South. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from. Just reading stuff, seeing stuff on TV and the movies. And I think it just captivated Mark Knopfler's mind. And that's why he loves it so, and he wrote about it so much early on in the band's history.
All right. So that's interesting. And now we're going down to our top three. So let's see how this all shakes out.
All right, yeah, my number 3, I'm going to go with the debut. Again, I like it's a little bit of like pub rock style, a little roots rock. I mean, Mark Knopfler's finger picking style really shines on this album. Sultans of Swing is obviously the most known, but I also like Wild West End and Down to the Waterline and Lions. I think are pretty good songs. And I mean, I was probably like 15 when I got into this album the first time. I remember I started playing guitar and I went to Guitar Center and I was looking for some instructional books. And the guy that ended up helping me at the counter, he must have been like an uber Dire Straits fan because he was trying to get me to buy all these Mark Knopfler method books for learning the guitar. So I think that's where my interest in Dire Straits really began, is with the first album, because he told me I needed to go home and listen to it and trying to develop a finger picking style in that same way. So yeah, so I still listen to this album quite a bit. It's fun, but I think the songwriting that Mark Knopfler would get into late on the later albums, that he definitely took a step up later on. So
Number 3 for me, Brothers in Arms from 1985. A huge album. It went 14 times platinum in the UK. The US sales were discussed already. Number 1, both here and in the UK. Worldwide sales of over 30 million copies. Produced by Neil Dorfman and Mark Knopfler. The thing about this record that always got me, when I was a kid, I would buy records mainly. All the time, actually. And I bought it on vinyl. And on CD and cassette, 4 songs are longer. So there's a time difference between the record and the CD and the cassette of almost 10 minutes. So that's music that I didn't even know existed until I got the CD years later. I agree with David. Some of it sounds a little dated, maybe the keyboard sounds of the time, because at this time they had 2 keyboard players in the band. A lot of guests on this album. And the songs that I really like on here, Oh, the whole first side I wrote, and One World. I think One World is a good deep track buried at the end of side 2 of the album. It's a little jazzy at times. It's a little laid back, but that was always their style. The mellow parts of music, sort of the jazz influence, the lounge type music. But they really hit the zeitgeist here with MTV, with Sting on the song Money for Nothing. And that's their big rock god moment. And I like So Far Away, of course. Walk of Life, I always liked. And my father even liked that song. They used that on a lot of sports shows. Walk of Life became a big hit in commercials. So it's a very good album. Number 3 for me.
My number 3 is Making Movies. Has anyone mentioned this one yet?
Not yet.
No. This one, I vacillated between this one at number 1 and number 3. Isn't that weird? But anyhow, I really like this record. I think the top 3, all of them have a lot of redeeming qualities, but this one, I don't know. It just came in as I've been listening to this catalog. I think it's been about 3 weeks that we've been talking about doing this, if not maybe a little bit longer. This one kind of went up to the top, and then, I listened to a couple other ones that are going to be ranked a little bit higher, and then this one went back down, and then, it just kind of wound up at number 3. Big one, obviously, Romeo and Juliet, which I don't know, that may actually be my favorite Dire Straits song. Would that be weird?
No, it's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great song. I don't know if that was do you guys remember the first Dire Straits song that you heard?
Oh yeah, of course, Sultans of Swing.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess it would be Sultans of Swing for me, but yeah, but I don't know. This one, for some reason, I felt like this one felt a little bit more familiar in terms of one of the first ones that drew me in. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Ask my ex-wife. She thought I was wrong all the time.
All right, so my number 3, looking at my old magic list here, is going to be none other than Love Over Gold, which, like Tom said, kicked off with the Telegraph Road, the all 14 minutes of it there. Extremely long song to open up an album. Very interesting. And only 5 songs in all on the album. That's another, almost sounds like back in the old Rush days where they only have a few songs on an album. But yeah, definitely some great guitar playing on this album. That's what stands out for me mostly on this album. The songs are, mostly driven by the guitar playing. You're not going to find that catchy song on here like Walk of Life or anything like that. These are just long, good old-fashioned songs that you really got to listen to. This is one of those albums you can just slap on and let it go all the way through. And a lot, sometimes you'll get an album where you get nothing but hits. And then other times you'll get one where, you really got to listen to it. But this is one you can just like drop on the needle and let it go all the way through without skipping a track. And that's why it's number 3 for me. So we're going to go down to number 2.
All right, yeah, my number 2 is Making Movies. I think this is where the sweet spot is for Dire Straits for me. I think the arrangements got more sophisticated, the songs got a little longer, and I mean, Knopfler has always been the kind of player who he's creative and tasteful enough in his playing that he's able to sustain my interest for long songs like that. Like I don't find myself getting bored at any time in any of these albums. And I mean, like Romeo and Juliet is great. I love Tunnel of Love, Solid Rock, Express Love. I mean, there's really not any wasted moment on this album for me. So, but I almost had it at number 1, but then the album I'll talk about later just beat it out. So that's my number 2. And Roy Bittan has some great keyboard moments on this album as well.
You mean Meatloaf's piano player?
And Bruce.
Oh, Bruce. Yeah, him too. Is it me now? Oh, goodness. I am number 2. I am at the famous Brothers in Arms. Am I the first one to mention this one?
No.
No. Okay.
Well, David's
Mr.
mentioned it.
Hens did first, and I think Davey
Yeah.
did as well. So
So am I the last to mention it?
No.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say this is, it's when I first approached this catalog, I thought this was gonna be like their like slam dunk number one.
Hmm.
That was my opinion, just because it was so ubiquitous. I'm waiting all show to say that word, but it
Good
really
word.
was. I mean, it just, when this thing came out, it was well, I'll tell you a funny story actually. Was when the song Money for Nothing came out. I remember I had a friend who was really into Mark Knopfler's guitar playing, and then he was also a big Richard Thompson fan. And if you are familiar with Richard Thompson, they have very similar styles of similar approaches to the guitar. And my buddy was actually a little disappointed in Money for Nothing because he felt like it was a sort of a sellout rock track, which in some ways it's interesting because it does have that kind of that interesting picking style like you were mentioning earlier, David, but he just distorts it and turns it into this kind of almost quasi, heavy metal riff. And the video, was fun, and it was a bit of social commentary, of course, but then just the other songs, just a lot of ear candy, Walk of Life, and I mean, how many hits did this record have? I mean, it must have gone about 4 or 5 deep.
4 or 5.
Yeah. So good record. It, off the top of my head, I can't remember the duds, but I think there's a couple that were a little lesser tracks, so that prevented it from being the perfect album. I think of like Synchronicity, which by the Police, which just has that one really bad song on it. I don't think that this one has one like that, but it's just not quite it didn't quite hit classic perfect album for me, if that makes sense.
It does. Coming
And
in,
I never got my chicks for free, by the way. I always had to pay for them.
my number 2 album from 1982, Love Over Gold. I always thought this was my favorite Dire Straits album, but it's coming in at number 2, Love Over Gold, produced by Mark Knopfler, back to a normal album length of 41 minutes. Went number 1 in the UK, number 19 here in the States, double platinum in the UK, and as we said before, Love Over Gold, certified gold in America. They have new keysman Alan Clark and extra guitar player Hal Linz, if I'm pronouncing his name right, on this record. And they allowed Mark Knopfler to expand his musical excursions and horizons here. It's also the last album with Pick Withers, and it sort of hit their art rock album. As you guys said, it starts out with the 14-minute Telegraph Road, which just builds and builds to this soaring, stunning climax. Then you had the single Private Investigations, which simmers and sizzles with a type of jazzy atmosphere. And then I just love Industrial Disease. The lyrics to that song, that unique Mark Knopfler guitar sound that started there, because I think they left the mics in an odd position in the studio the night before. And then when he started playing, there was this weird sound. And they said, hey, let's go with that sound. And that's the sound they used on Industrial Disease. And then, as you said, Tom, on Money for Nothing on the next album. So he had this unique sound and style. And I love the lyrics on Industrial Disease. And Mark Knopfler even manages to drop in his previous band's name with Pick Withers, the drummer, Brewer's Droop. And everyone should look that up to find out what Brewer's Droop actually is. So the lyrics, that could be my favorite Dire Straits song, Industrial Disease. That keyboard, that Farfisa type sound, the guitars, the lyrics, even though it's almost 6 minutes long, an amazing song. That's my number 2, Love Over Gold.
Okay, very good. And my number 2 is none other than Making Movies, which I tell you, I listened to this. We've been waiting to do this, like Mr. Jennings said, for a couple weeks now, and I had to go back and re-listen to a couple of these albums. And this album, Making Movies, was actually like my number 5. But after listening to it a couple more times, and that's how close they were with me, but listening to it a couple more times, it definitely catapulted right up there. And I know Tom was talking about this one when he mentioned it, but it just a great solid album. I think it's definitely definitely their second best album to me. And Espresso Love, Hand in Hand, that just some great writing by Knopfler as well as playing. Romeo and Juliet, I would say, is probably the strongest song on the album. And then it's like it just hits you right from the beginning of the album. It's not a bad track on it. They just keep rolling right along, which compared to only my number one is better in my estimation. But this one definitely, it's one of those albums that I came into later on down the road. I think COVID has really helped expand my music vocabulary per se when you're looking at certain bands and their catalog. I was never really a big Dire Straits guy. The only album I owned was, I think, a greatest hits one. You know what I mean? So once COVID came into play, you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't do anything. So I did a lot of catching up on bands' catalogs that I never really got into before. So it really opened up the doors for me. So I'm really, a little bit more newer to the Dire Straits catalog, but I ended up getting the whole collection now on CD, and they're all remastered. So I came in at the right time, so I got the best possible quality right now. And yeah, this is definitely an album that I'm so glad I discovered because I never really knew much about it other than the songs off of it that were on the greatest hits. So, now that I've had time to digest it over the last few years, definitely a great album and my second number two favorite from Dire Straits.
See, now maybe if we get another pandemic, I'll become a Whitesnake fan.
There you go. There you go. It's an idea. You never know.
It's an idea. If
All right.
any of you out in the labs in China are listening.
So if any of you guys are paying attention, if any of you
I
guys are paying
I think I got the best reaction from Davey on that one.
Oh boy. Well, anyhow, we're going down.
We haven't mentioned COVID in a long time. That's why I was like, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
oh man, I thought we were removed from COVID. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I had to go for it.
All right. So
on a more serious note, before we jump in, that you did make a great point though that I want to kind of expound upon is like albums that you listen to the first time and albums you listen to the 10th time. There are really some albums that for whatever reason they just take a while to grow on you. As a Todd Rundgren fan, there's been a couple in his collection where like the first few times I heard him, I was like, oh, this sucks. It's nowhere near as good as his last record. And then, you hear it 7, 8, 9 times or in a different context. And you're like, oh, now I get it. It's interesting. I mean, there are those rare albums where you put them on the first time, like Moving Pictures. First time I heard it, I was like, oh my God, this is great. But there's been other ones like even like Pink Floyd, The Wall. The first time I heard The Wall by Pink Floyd, I didn't like it. But later on, I really grew to appreciate how incredible it is. Except for maybe the fourth side. There's a little drop off. But we digress. Let's move on.
Okay. All right. So we're down to our number one. So anybody that's been paying attention should pretty much guess what everybody has chosen as number one. So let's go with Mr. David Hens. What do you got for your all-time best Dire Straits?
Yeah, I went with Love Over Gold as my number one. I feel like there's no wasted moment on this album. I mean, it's only 5 songs and everyone hits pretty hard. Telegraph Road is great. Industrial Disease is definitely my favorite, as Davey mentioned also. I think it's great stuff on there. I mean, to me, I've always felt this is like Knopfler's most Springsteen-esque album in a lot of ways. Like the way he's got that gravelly cross between Bob Dylan and Springsteen and the vocals and some of the arrangements on here. I could almost hear the E Street Band playing it. And Alan Clark's keys on this are just great. And the vinyl pressing really sounds great. I played it the other day. It's one of those albums I think has aged really well, even though it's not really talked about that much anymore. But yeah, that's my number one.
So speaking of Alan Clark, the very first time I ever used Zoom for an interview was with Alan Clark because he was in England and he didn't put his video on, which I thought was a little creepy, but yeah. What does that have to do with my number one? Absolutely nothing because he's not on it. for my number one is the very first Dire Straits album, only one that I own on vinyl. I should have pulled it out because Davey pulled out his vinyl, but yes, the first Dire Straits album. I just think it was magical. I think some bands or first records are just there's just something that's magical about it. I know Joey's a big Kinks fan, and you so you kind of appreciate the brothers. I think two brothers can really bring out the best in each other. Unfortunately, one of them, which by the way, I don't know if you guys have looked. I don't think I've ever heard and it's David Knopfler. That's the brother, right? I don't think I've ever heard one of his solo records, but I was just poking around to see whatever happened to him. And he has this massive solo catalog. So he's been very busy, but I'm really not familiar with it at all. But yeah, I just thought that this was a pretty special record. And it interesting stories behind it too, in terms of, all the record, like so many other bands, it's like all the record labels rejected it and, blah, 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 before somebody put some faith in it. Cause I think they went, if I remember correctly, they went on the BBC and played some of their songs even before the record was out. So there you go. Don't look so thrilled, guys. Come on.
Well, Joey was right. We all have different number ones.
Do we really? Like this would be a first.
I'm pretty sure we all have different number ones. Coming in at number one for me from 1980, double platinum in England, platinum in the States, peaked at number 4 in England, number 19 here, Making Movies, produced by Jimmy Iovine and Mark Knopfler. And as David said, they got Roy from Bruce's band and from Meatloaf, as Thom said, and his keyboards make this album for me. I just love the keyboards. Roy Batan from Springsteen's band, the E Street Band. And this is the album where David and Mark got into a big fight, and Mark threw David out, or David left, whichever way you want to believe it. So he erased his brother's guitar tracks. He erased his brother's tracks from the album. So there was obviously some really bad blood there. And they got Sid McGuinness from Paul Letterman, David Letterman's show. Paul Schaefer's The World's Most Dangerous Band. Sid McGuinness played guitar on this album, uncredited. It's his rhythm guitar you hear. And I just think that this album has a big scope. It's very cinematic, like Love Over Gold, as David said. And Tunnel of Love is an amazing proggy epic to open the album. Romeo and Juliet chronicles his doomed relationship with musician Holly Vincent. You may remember her from Holly and the Italians. Skate Away and Espresso Love were played on New York City rock radio all the time. And I fell in love with those two songs. Those might be my favorite Dire Straits songs. Espresso Love, Skate Away, amazing songs. Of course, Solid Rock is a great song. Maybe the one slight weak point is the last song, Lace Boys. That would probably knock off half a point. I'd probably rate this a 9.5. Amazing album, Making Movies, my number one.
All right. Very good. And my number one is none other than Brothers in Arms, which I really thought it would be everybody's number one, really. It's just I sold the most albums, big seller. Matter of fact, it sold more copies than all the rest of the catalog combined and then some, which is, something that you don't see too often. One album doing that over a strong 5 other album catalog, but that's what happened here. I think it was a touch of genius having Sting come in and sing on Money for Nothing, because that, the Police were really big at that point in time as they were on their way out. They kind of passed the torch to Dire Straits for an album before they kind of faded away, and it took them 6 years to get back into the swing of things. But I knew how popular this band had become. I remember I was at an Aerosmith concert in Rochester, New York, at the old Silver Stadium. It was Foreigner, Aerosmith, Joe Walsh, and the Hooters. And I remember right before Aerosmith came on, they play a lot of music in the background for the concert goers while they're waiting for the bands to change over on the stage. And I remember this song came on, and I could not believe how a rock concert, because this was considered pop at the time. It was amazing how the rock crowd kind of like was into this song so much at the concert. It was really amazing. Kind of woke me up. I just remember sitting there and looking around, and I couldn't believe the reaction it got. And that just shows you how that's the song that put them over the top. That's the song that drove the album, and that's and then obviously from there, Walk of Life picked up a lot of speed. That one rode all the way up until number 6, and So Far Away reached number 29. Well, actually, those are on the U.S. mainstream rock charts. Walk of Life was number 7 on the regular singles charts, and So Far Away was 19. And One World was interesting. I didn't even realize it. That song was released as a single as well, but only went to number 8 on the mainstream rock charts. So it's interesting how and I don't ever remember hearing that song at all. So it's amazing it went that high like that, and even though it didn't go on the regular charts. But yeah, to me, it's just a great album. That's the album that really got me into the band at the time. And who knows what could have happened if they would have followed it up with another album within a year or two after that came out. It's just they had that big performance at Live Aid with it, where they played the Money for Nothing there with Sting. But Live Aid's another show in itself we can talk about someday. Talk about famous concerts or something, do an episode. But it's my number 1 for Dire Straits, and I don't think it's ever going to be beat in my estimation for me. It just like Thom said, sometimes you feel right away what's going to be locked in at number 1 for you. That I knew right away what mine was. Any last comments to add about this ranking here, gentlemen?
Yes, it's cool. We all had different number 1 albums, because when we did Boston, Pak the Khan, Harvard Yard in Boston, we had the same one, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that first Boston album is so far and away better. I think that kind of speaks to some degree of Dire Straits's consistency, like the albums were pretty consistent. And even though the one was just massively successful commercially, it still kind of fit within the catalog. It wasn't like a real anomaly. I think it's just an album that people discovered because of a massive single. I mean, the riff to Money for Nothing is just, I mean, it's like one of those few songs where, name that tune in 2 notes, you just know it like the second it comes in. Even just the build up, with the whole, Sting and everything like that. It was just such a brilliant song that really, I mean, if you were of a certain age, you just remember that with a lot of fondness.
Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
Sounds good. Anything to add,
And
David?
One last thing, sorry, before I go, and I'll let David go, but what's interesting too is that song "Money for Nothing." Is they mentioned MTV when MTV was a music channel and just everywhere, and that's no longer the case. But yet the song doesn't still sound dated. I think sometimes when you mention something from an era, like I was listening to the song the other day that my son was my son Trevor's band was singing Brown Eyed Girl, and they mentioned a transistor radio, I mean, and I looked over at my sister and I go, man, do you think any of these kids in the band that are singing the song even have a clue what a transistor radio is? So it's funny when you can have those sort of cultural references that are dated, but yet it still doesn't take away from the impact of the song.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Sounds good. This was a fun one. Yeah.
Could I just say one thing?
Mm-hmm.
My channel, Cretin Classics on YouTube. I'm adding stuff to it all the time now. So please give it a look. And Thom, you should promote yours.
I would like to also promote Cretin Classics in addition to mine.
Thanks.
Tuning in with Thom, THOM, doesn't always have the most up-to-date content, but everything that is on it is brilliant. And I'm currently working on a grant-funded podcast project on the life of Vince Welnick, former Tubes and Grateful Dead and Todd Rundgren keyboard player.
All
so
right.
keep an eye out for that.
And David, if you want to give your plug a site there.
Yeah, it's Music and Other Drugs. I cover a wide variety of stuff. I do concert reviews and interviews. Tomorrow I'll be talking to Ace Frehley about his new solo album, so that'll be fun.
Nice.
Oh Lord. Yes. Do you want to practice on me? I do a great Ace Frehley. Go ahead, ask me an Ace Frehley question.
I think I've heard you do that before. On one of the rankings.
Well, Gene and Paul, they always said that they got really mad at me because I wanted to play the guitar solo. Sorry.
Yes,
Hey,
it's weird.
Joey.
They gave me 25 minutes.
Tommy Thayer. He was. I punched him in the head. Tommy Thayer.
Jeez. All right, and then so that wraps it up for this one. Stay tuned for another episode down the road.